Am I on here? They can see me now. Yeah, there I am. And what class is this again? Oh, I'm not gonna say. I forgot. Oh, I don't know what I'm typing. Okay. Ina alhamdulillah, wa salat, wa salam ala wa rasulullah. I want to welcome everybody to our series, the Maqasidic Tafsir. The Maqasidic Tafsir. And this is our class whereas we are going over the science of the Quran, of how interpretation or explanation of the Quran is given. And as you guys can see, teaching yourself the Quran, you can forget that. Well, teaching yourself Islam, period, you can forget it. Because one of the ways that Allah has protected and preserved this religion for us is by making it so that man can't teach himself and distort it. Oh, you can distort it, but the reality remains reality. I mean, you will end up looking like a deviator or an innovator, like a lot of these brothers look today. But Allah protected the Quran. He protected the religion of Islam. He protected the hadiths, the Sunnah. He protected Islam. So we've been studying how, when it comes to explaining the Quran, how that's a science in and of itself. You have to know the linguistics, which is the wording. You have to be able to analyze the verses. You have to know the construction of the chapters. You have to know the connectivity of the chapters with the hadiths, because the hadiths are an explanation of the Quran. You also have to know the history of the religion, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and how Islam spread, and all of that. You know, it's a science in and of itself. And we've been speaking about how when you read a chapter of the Quran, each chapter has a topic. That's what we talked about the last time we met for this class. How each chapter of the Quran has a subject matter or a topic, and how the verses of that chapter, within that chapter, will relate to whatever the topic or the subject matter is. We talked about how if there are verses that do not relate, we do not say that those verses contradict the Quran. Instead, we say that the meaning of those verses lie with the law. And Allah does that on purpose for whatever reasons he chooses to. So we went over that, and we talked about how really, if you want to understand the meaning of a chapter, you should read the chapter before it and the chapter after it too, because there may be some knowledge as to what's going on in those two chapters as well. Okay? So that's basically what we talked about the last time we met. Today, what we're going to do, and let me put the PowerPoint up on the screen so everyone can see. And let me make it, well, my Zoom room is in a way as usual. Hold on. I keep saying I'm going to figure out how to move that Zoom thing out the way, and I forget every time. Okay. Today, there it is. Today we're going to speak about how there is a need, the need of an exclusive higher meaning based interpretation, or how we need an exclusive higher meaning based understanding of the chapters of the Quran. And let me but before we get into that, I think I got a quiz. Let's The quiz should be here. Let me turn this around. Let me give you guys a brief quiz. It's only 2 questions. Yeah, here we go. Only 2 questions to cover what we discussed the last time. The last time we met in this class, we went over the history of Tafsir. When exactly did explanations of the Quran appear? And we talked about how there were no Tafsir books. There were no Tafsir explanation books during the time of the first 3 generation of Muslims. And who can tell us why that was so? Why is it that there was no Tafsir book during those first 3 generations' time? Come on, people, wake up. I need some answers.
There was no need for any Tafsir books during that time because they were living right there with the Prophet Muhammad when revelations were coming down and they was getting it directly from him. So there wasn't a need for that. And the 2 generations after that, they were still hearing it from reliable sources, those who did live during the time of the Prophet.
Exactly. Good job, Latifa. Exactly, guys. The companions witnessed the revelations as they were sent down. They knew why they were sent and what happened and the meaning behind each surah and each revelation. So they didn't have to have a book on that. They knew that. And we talked about how 3 of the companions set up schools to teach the meaning of the Quran. Who were those 3 companions? Can y'all remember? I mean, and I'm talking about male companions. There were 3 male companions. One had a school in Medina, one had a school in Mecca, and one set up a school in Kufa when Islam spread through the Roman Empire. Who were those 3 companions that set up Quran schools to teach the people the meaning of the Quran? What were the names of those 3 companions? Come on, y'all should know these names.
The 3 companions was Ibn Masud, Ibn Ka'b, and Ibn Abbas.
Exactly. Those were the 3 companions that set up schools teaching the people the meaning of the Quran. So there was no need, like we talked about, as Islam spread through the Roman Empire and the Persian empires, when people converted to Islam and they began to try to change the Allah's names, Allah's attributes, the meaning. When they tried to change what the Allah's lordship, the people would run to the companions. They went to Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar and told Ibn Umar what was going on. And he said, don't worry about them. Those people are kafir. They are not of us. So the companions were around to set the record straight if there was any distortion. And their students were around after them to set the record straight, and to give the meaning and explanation and history and all of that. So that's why there was no Tafsir books around back then. So the next question, how many years after the companions was it before a Tafsir of the Quran appeared? Can anybody tell us that? The first book of Tafsir appeared how many years after? Can you say it again?
300.
Yes, 300 years. It was 300 years after them that the first Tafsir book appeared. And then after that book, many others appeared, but that book served as the basis or the foundation of the others, and it was during that time that the people began to, these Mu'tazila groups, because the companions and their predecessors and stuff had died off. And that's when it started getting, bad. And Allah's names and attributes distorted, abused, and that's when those books appear. So that's what we talked about basically the last time we met. And again, this class is something that you're not going to learn at a masjid. This is the science of the Quran. You don't learn this stuff unless you're going to school like El Azhar, unless you're going to El Azhar or the University of Medina to get a degree in Islamic science, the science of the Quran. This is the only place where you would learn this stuff. So a lot of this stuff, you don't need to know, but I wanted you guys to know, remember those two things. 300 years after the companions is when the first Tafsir book appeared, and there was no need during their lifetime, because why did we need it when you had them to set the record straight? Okay. Now, today, we're going to talk about exclusive meanings of the Quran. Identifying the higher meanings within the Quran is necessary, especially today. And also, not only is it necessary to identify higher meanings within the Quran, but also when doing that, you have to have a basis for balance to achieve the meaning. There must be a basis for balance to achieve the higher meanings. So a functional approach to explaining the meaning of the Quran requires exclusive focus. The exclusive focus means to focus on one particular thing or things, plural, that were revealed that will help you to come up with the correct understanding. I'm trying to word this in English a little bit more simpler for you guys. And I'm going to make this larger. Yeah, I will, brother. So you guys can screenshot. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Okay, good. Okay. Now, the period of inclusive higher meaning explanation as a trend can be described as the developmental stage of tafsir. A breakthrough in the higher meaning trend was brought about by prominent contemporary scholars, such as you might have heard of Muhammad Abduh or Ibn Ashir. You may have heard me mention him. Or Abul Alam Maududi. You may have heard somebody mention him. That was in 1979 when he came about. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Said Qutb from out of Egypt. Okay, these were some contemporary, which are modern day scholars that brought about a higher meaning based understanding of the Quran. And then from out of Indonesia, more men emerged, such as Quraish Shihab, and also a man named Dr. Hamka in 1979. So this is when the inclusive higher meaning ended up breaking through to a higher meaning. I would say you can see in the 1960s, 1970s, to try to help the people to get a better understanding of the Quran. And let me put this in some lay English for you guys. I want y'all to remember the hadith that I've mentioned so many times, whereas the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says each generation of Muslims will become further and further and further away from the true Islam, to the point that when the last hour does come, even though everybody living on earth at that time, the religion of the land of the world will be Islam, they will all be kafir. Well, as you can see, during the 1960s, that was and the 70s was a great era of history here worldwide. In America, this was the civil rights movement in America. This was also the era when Egypt, was going through its wars. Egypt was a great power back then, had a great army, military. A lot was going on, and people had deviated. People had deviated away from understanding Islam and its truthfulness. Many of other deviant sects had emerged, many terroristic groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and other stuff had emerged. The Palestinian Party. There was a lot going on in the world back in those days. So people needed to have a better understanding of the Quran, because remember, guys, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah is gonna send calamities because each generation of Muslims becomes weaker than the previous and further away from understanding Islam correctly than the previous people before them. There will be repercussions. Allah will send calamities. He'll send war. The 60s had war going on, just like what y'all see happening today. This was happening in the 60s. This was happening in the 50s. This was happening in the 70s. We had wars going on. Egypt had its war. America had its war. So people became weak. And just like today, Muslims today can't handle what Allah has sent to them. So the Muslims today are turning to man instead of Allah. You got Muslims today thinking that they can tweak the laws of Allah. We know it's haram to vote in elections. We know that. You can't I don't care what your so-called contemporary people say. Can't nobody issue a ruling that goes against what Allah and the Prophet said. It's haram for a non-Muslim to be a guardian over us. Period. Dot. If that's the case, let me go get the man next door who's a kafir dopehead to be my guardian. Okay? We know that crap is haram. But just like, we're weak today and think we can change the rules, they went through this stuff in the 50s and 60s and 70s too. So that's became the need for people. The Prophet said, whenever you live to see Allah's wrath, war is Allah's wrath, guys. War doesn't come from Zionists. War comes from Allah. And he says it's his wrath, his punishment upon us. Why? Because we have deviated away from his commands, his book. And so the Prophet told us, if you live to see that type of stuff, turn back, fall back on your Aqidah, fall back on the Quran of what Allah is saying to you, and try to change the condition of yourself, because Allah says he will never change the condition of a people until they change the condition of themselves back to him. So in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the same stuff that's going on today was going on then. So that's when these men emerged and put together more exclusive, more exclusive, interpretations or explanations of what Allah is saying, because the people needed to hear that. We don't tweak Allah's laws to meet society standards. That's haram. But what we do is turn to Allah's laws, fall upon them, find strength in them, and then use them to change the condition of yourself and then society. We don't allow society to change us. We change it. That's Islam. But you don't hear the brothers today telling y'all that because they're away. This generation is the worst generation. This generation is so far away from the Sunnah and the Quran that it's pathetic. Okay? So, these scholars that came about in this era, let me make this back so y'all can see. These scholars I just mentioned, Muhammad Abdul Ibn Ashir, Said Qutb and them, these scholars strongly supported the higher meaning of the Quran as one of the principles of explanation. And of course, they tried to use this to try to call the people back, to Allah's laws, to what Allah is saying, so we can change ourselves. You want the war to end in Gaza? Can't nobody end it. First of all, it's not a war in Gaza. This is a war against Islam. And it ain't going to end unless Allah ends it. Just like then, you want the Vietnam War to end? You want the war against Egypt and Israel to end? The war against Iraq and Iran to, oh yeah, these are wars that went on. Iraq and Iran to end? You got to stop thinking man has the power, because man doesn't. The only one who has the power to begin and end anything is Allah. So again, the higher meaning of the Quran, this is what we have to aim for, because aiming to understand the Quran better gives us the strength to handle whatever hardships Allah imposes upon us while maintaining our Islamic dignity and our Islamic belief. Does everyone understand that? And this is what we've deviated away from today. The Muslims today are weak. The majority of Muslims today are weak. The men are not men. The men have turned into sniveling, emotional people, creatures who are not strong. They're not strong like Khalid bin Walid is. That he's gone. There's no men like Khalid bin Walid. There's no men like Umar. There's no men like those, the early generations. The men today are just weak. They're broken. They're broken by this dunya. Okay? So, let's talk about these men here that came up with this a higher meaning. Let's look at Muhammad Abdul. He presented an understanding of the Quran driven by its higher objectives that guide humanity toward happiness in this world and success in the hereafter. He asserted that an overemphasis on Quranic styles, syntax, past stories, legal discussions, and theology and advice might overshadow the supreme purpose of the meaning-based shroud. So in other words, what this man did was he put together an understanding, a higher aimed understanding, and took away, he focused on happiness, how to find happiness in this world. Okay, how to find success in the hereafter without emphasizing what happened in the past, or without emphasizing the laws of Allah and stuff that can take people away from that. So in other words, he was trying to give the people hope. Okay? He focused on giving the people hope because that's what he felt the people needed at that time, because they were dealing with the same crap that's going on today, war and stuff. Now, the scholars of the exclusive higher meaning based explanation, they have a structural approach to tafsir that first describes the primary higher aim of a chapter, which means what is the overall meaning of the chapter. They base their meaning on what the chapter is talking about. And then they build on the foundation by focusing on the different verses of that chapter. And from the verses of that chapter, they use that to form a secondary purpose. Okay, so say, for example, this chapter is going to speak about, the chapter Nisa is going to speak about the rights of women in Islam, the role of women in Islam, and the rights of women in Islam. That's the overall topic of this chapter. So what the scholars of the exclusive higher meaning will do is look at all the verses and put them together, the ones that help come up with the rights and the role of the woman, and then they'll look at what other secondary meaning might be there, which is how men should treat the woman. So this chapter is now not just talking about the rights of women in Islam, but it's also teaching about how men should treat the women and marriage in Islam. So the number one topic is women's rights. The second secondary topic would be marriage, how to treat spouses in Islam. I'm trying to give an example off my head like that. So some groups of verses, which are the secondary meanings, will support the overall meaning of the chapter. So, for example, we're going to look at Surah Nisa. The overall meaning of the chapter is the rights of women in Islam. But these secondary verses, which speak about marriage and how a man is supposed to treat his wife, they help support that topic. So that's how they go about with the explanation. I hope this is making sense. Is this making sense to you guys? I'm trying to break it down in plain English. Can anybody tell me, is this understandable? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it is clear. Okay. And this brings about benefits, a lot of benefits of an exclusive higher meaning explanation. Number one, it's a tool to achieve the overall meaning which Allah wants us to achieve. Because remember, Allah says in the interpretation of the meaning, the Quran, this is a book which we have sent down to you full of blessings so that you can ponder over its words and that people of understanding may remember. So this is one of the great benefits of an exclusive higher meaning based explanation. Remember, Allah is telling us to seek the purpose of his words. So when we use this approach, we seek the purpose of Allah's words and we can act upon them. You see what your rights are as a Muslim woman, what your role is as a Muslim woman, and you can act upon it. And also, you know how to live in a marriage, how to be a better support and a better spouse to your husband too. And if a person is going to be an interpreter of the Quran, he is duty bound to reflect upon what the intended meaning of the verses are and the topic of the chapter and all of that. Okay, he has to also look at what happened to cause Allah to send this down. For example, that one verse of Surah Nisa, that one verse that speaks about a divorce, hitting a woman. That verse is used so much because people don't know the circumstance of that revelation. They don't know the story of that revelation. That verse is not telling men to go around beating up on their wives. It's talking about a woman a woman who's skanky, a woman that can't be trusted, a woman that leaves the house and embarrasses her husband. So you have to know the circumstances of the revelation and how it connects with the present time and the present events. And that's what these brothers did, especially this brother. Okay. Being that these were bad times, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s were bad times. He was able to do that, to take the verses of the Quran, give the meaning and the circumstances behind and the revelation and how it connected with the present time, the present events, which is what I try to do. What I try to do with you guys. When I'm teaching my classes, I'll take a verse of the Quran in my PowerPoint and try to show you how. I'll give you the history behind it, what happened to make Allah send it down, how the companions understood it. Then I'll try to get you to connect it to today. Like I did when I was trying to let you guys understand that voting is haram. I don't care what these weak men today stay in their khutbahs. It's haram. They cannot change the laws of Allah because of society. Okay. So whoever the Quran teacher or interpreter is, he delivers the undeniable coherence of the verses, the harmony of the verses, the unity within a chapter. Okay. And treats it with as being holy. That means not changing it, not tweaking it, as these brothers from out of Texas want y'all to think that we can do. Tweak them. We have to remember, guys, the trunk is the chapter, the branches are the different verses, and the leaves are the individual verses of a chapter. Okay, so this is important, guys. You know, we don't see that many of these brothers today using this approach as they should. Instead, they're tweaking it because, like I said, each generation is weaker than the previous ones. Even though the Muslims were weak in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they were stronger than the Muslims are today. The Muslims today are the weakest ever because we are the current generation. So when it comes to explaining the Quran and understanding the meaning of a chapter, it's like a building. A chapter represents a building that is made of different pillars and bricks. The pillars represent the group of verses. The bricks symbolize the individual verses which make up the pillars and complete the structures. So everything connects. When you read a surah, each verse and each word connects together to help you to develop the understanding that Allah is trying to convey to you within that chapter. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that make sense? So if I'm going to read Surah Nisa, each verse connects together to help you to achieve the meaning of the overall meaning or objective that Allah is trying to get us to understand, which in that case, I'm using as an example, are the rights of women in Islam. So a lot of benefits to this. By using this approach, guys, this becomes a means to boost our iman, to make us stronger in our faith by implementing solutions to whatever pressing real world problems that we have. And let me give an example. Today, Sheikh Saud did a great job. He used this example today. How many of you can recognize that? He gave you guys the meaning of Surah An-Nasr, the surah of victory. He showed how each verse connected together to the overall topic. Who can tell me what was the topic of that chapter, of that surah? Surah An-Nasr. What's the overall topic? The topic is victory, the victory of Allah. The help and victory of Allah. That's the topic. And he gave you guys an example as to how each verse connected. Allah telling the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the first verse, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. It may seem like help is not there for you now. Then the next verse, it'll connect. I'm just giving an example to make this short. Okay, I'm not breaking down the meaning of it. I mean, I'm not giving y'all the true meaning, but I'm trying to make it short. Then the next verse, you may be outnumbered now. You may be outnumbered now. Then the next verse, but the day will come when every home will know your name. Every home will know of Islam. Every home, Islam will become the predominant way. Y'all see what I'm talking about? An-Nasr. And then how we can take that. I'm going to show you how these brothers like Muhammad Abdul and them did. They would take a chapter like An-Nasr. Look at what's happening to the Muslims today. The Muslims have lost, many of them have lost their faith. Many Muslims can't get past their emotional distress over what's going on in Gaza. Many Muslims feel defeated because Trump is president. Many Muslims think that, victory is gone, that it's over. We're doomed. We're doomed. So what the Quran interpreter would do is like what Sheikh Saud did. You read Surah Nasr, you learn that Allah's victory will always be there. We will be victorious. Islam will always prevail. We will never be destroyed. We will never be wiped out. You use the science of connectivity, whereas the Prophet Muhammad said, our nation, this nation will never be destroyed by its enemies. They will never obliterate us. So that's how these men would do. They would take the Quran, a chapter like An-Nasr, and use it to help you to face the problems that you're dealing with in the world now, and realize that we should never lose hope. Don't ever lose hope, because again, the power is not in the hand of man anyway. As An-Nasr is saying, Allah has the power, not man. Man has no power to do anything. If all the creation were to come together, I'm using the science of connectivity to another verse from a different chapter. If all mankind were to come together to destroy you, they wouldn't be able to lift a finger unless Allah willed it. So this is what the interpreter does. He will boost your iman by implementing solutions to whatever pressing real world problem you're faced with. Okay? So this is what we need to do as Muslims when the Prophet says that we need to fall back upon our belief system in times of hardship. That's what I've been preaching to you guys ever since this so-called war started. Okay? Because I not say so-called because it didn't start last year. It started with the Bush regime. It's just spread it to Gaza. Well, it's past Gaza now. It's in other parts of the Muslim world. So we need to stop all this emotionalism, this panicking, posting up all this garbage on our Facebook pages, embarrassing ourselves, caught up in the politics of the kafir will never have the upper hand over us. That's a promise Allah gave to us. The victory of Allah is here, guys. The Prophet Muhammad told us that Allah promised we will never be destroyed and genocided by the kafir. Our destruction will come from each other, not from the kafir. All right, I'm going to stop right here. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Any questions or comments? I hope I broke this down to you guys because I tried to make it simple.
Yeah, you did make it simple too. And I just wanted to say that this was needed too, because what's going on with this presidency, a lot of Muslims has lost hope. And I've been hearing it over these past little couple of days. So, but the words, everything that you're saying now that's why we can't lose hope and look to solutions in the Quran of like, because I didn't come for Dr. Saad, his class. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. But with the stories and everything in the Quran that comes with it, it will bring you more, like, you know what I'm saying? You won't worry so much and won't think you all caught up in knots, and just everybody's crazy right now. So this was needed. So
yeah, I mean, it's shocking to me. I mean, I see men that's supposed to know better. I mean, who cares? This ain't the first time Trump won an election. So what? Who cares? And they all the same. And that's the thing, like Allah, that's another verse to fall back on. Allah says that they will never have no kafir. There's no good kafir. There's no such thing as a good kafir, guys. A kafir is a kafir is a kafir. There's no such thing as a good kafir. And none of them will ever have your interest at heart. So why are these Muslims all out of it? It's because they don't have the correct aqidah. They're probably the people that Allah is getting ready to cleanse the earth of. Remember, guys, Allah sends war to cleanse the earth of bad, ignorant people. Maybe there's some of the ones that need to be cleansed. I mean, I'm keeping it real. Only the strong survive. You that weak that you trust in man instead of Allah, then maybe you one of the people that Allah needs to rid the earth of. He had to rid the earth of those of the Israelites, even though they saw miracle after miracle. Allah sent miracle after miracle to them. They saw the Red Sea part. Allah sent them food from the heavens, and they still disobeyed him and rejected him. So Allah said, let me just rid the earth of you. Let me just let you die out. So maybe some of these weak Muslims is acting crazy. They need to be die out. That's why Allah sends war. That's one of the reasons. Get rid of these weak, sniveling Muslims. I know I'm sick of them. It's disgusting. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. That's not us. Boy, if Umar were living, if Abu Bakr were here and they saw Muslims carrying on over some kafir elections. Boy, how stupid you people are. It's embarrassing. Yeah, any other questions? But what is this? During the cold weather, I wear long. Let me see, Brother Tajri. Got to put it up here so I can read it. Yeah, I got my eyes dilated so I can't see good. Sister Layla, during the cold weather, I wear long sleeves sweater underneath my scrubs. When I do wudu for Asr, no, you have to move them sleeves up. You can only wipe over your turban, and your shoes, but not your, no, you got to, if you're going to wear long sleeves, pull them up. I used to wear long sleeves too. You can push them up. You got to do your arm. You can't wipe over your sleeves, Brother Tajri. Yeah. No. And that's for the sisters too. A lot of women ask me that too. No, we can't wipe over the sleeve. You got to, move it up. Get that arm. You can wipe over the hijab and the shoe, the top of the shoe. That's about it. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, inshallah, we're going to close out for tonight and make sure everybody's here tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow we have the inshallah if I'm still living and kicking, because I don't know. My days are numbered. What I tell you, Tiba, it's probably the last year for Layla Nashiba. So my days are numbered. So, but if I'm alive and kicking, I'll be here. Yes, the Q&A will be tomorrow, inshallah. 9:30. Yes. Yeah. And I'll talk a little bit more about hope. Yes, I'll do something about hope for y'all too. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to log out for right now. The Zoom room is open. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.